Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 177, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Monday, October 2nd, 2023. New week, new month, new podcast episode. Welcome to October and another week here. It is Monday. I hope your week is off to a good start. At the moment I'm recording this, it is Sunday. I know, I fib a little. You have to with these podcasts. But I am currently watching football on TV, Red Zone channel, so it's flipping back and forth between all the games that are on. And I've got a WNBA playoff game on my phone. So I'm also trying to do this podcast, so I'm having to kind of avoid these screens for the time being. But yeah, I may have a sports problem, and I don't even watch sports as much as I used to as a kid. But Sundays are a little tough. I'm just as crazy on Sundays as I was as a child, watching all these football games and everything. So that is what I am doing on Sunday. But that's not all I did this weekend or approaching the weekend since the last podcast. I did a couple of fun things on Thursday after I recorded Friday's episode. I pulled off a rare double feature of events here in the Holy City after I accidentally bought tickets to do two different types of shows on the same night. I did not realize it was the exact same date when the shows were announced because they were announced at varying times earlier this year. But I was able to pull it off for the most part. First up, I went to the Riviera Theater, finally saw the actual theater itself, as the last time I was there, I think less than a month ago, the event was, for some reason, not in the main theater room. It was more in like a banquet hall, basically. So I was excited to finally see the theater itself. It looks really great in there. It's a unique venue, since they have like round tables in kind of the center, in front of it, regular seats, and behind it, kind of like, an upper section of seats as well. So very unique looking as well, with the paintings on the wall and some of the old, or at least they look like old fixtures. So I did enjoy that. And the show I went to see was Michelle Wolf. She's a comedian. You may remember her. She started as like a writer and performer on Seth Meyers' late night show. Then she ended up getting her own program for a little while, and also was the designated comedian for the White House Correspondents' Dinner a few years ago. Show was great. She was hilarious, as you would expect. Had a really good time. I did leave a little early because my other tickets were a concert over at the Music Farm. Jimmy Eat World, who I actually saw, I think it was earlier this year. It may have been late last year. I'm forgetting when exactly I saw them last, but it was at the Performing Arts Center. This time around, the Music Farm. I had a friend in attendance there. I was like, hey, can you text me when the opening band ends so I have a general idea of when I should head over there if I want to catch the whole set? So that's what happened. I had my first experience in the balcony at the Music Farm. Well, I should say my first experience in the balcony since it reopened. They used to have like kind of a balcony on both sides. I had been up there on each side in the past for different shows, but this was the first time I bought a ticket with that add-on for the balcony. I had a feeling the show was going to be a little crowded. My social anxiety was probably going to be a little high. So I decided to go to the balcony. They only sell like 20 tickets or something like that per show, because it's not a huge area, but it's nice up there. There's some chairs, couches, tables where you can kind of relax, and then everyone kind of goes up to the railing so they can see the show. So a different experience, not for everybody. Some people like to be right in there in the crush of people up close. I had done that in my younger days, but as I've gotten older and don't really want to get all sweaty and gross in the pit section of the Music Farm, I'll take the balcony or hanging out in the back sections if I'm down on the floor. But fantastic show. It's just a band I've liked. I've seen them several times over the years, and they always bring it. Whether I've seen them at gigantic amphitheaters back in their heyday, in the early mid 2000s. To just these small venues like the Music Farm, or mid-size like the Performing Arts Center, and they just always bring the energy no matter what size the crowd is, and they're just a solid band. They kind of get grouped in with that emo pop punk feel, but they're they're a little bit more like indie rock almost. But in any event, I had a great time doing both of those things. And I was glad I was able to pull it off after buying tickets to two things. And instead of trying to resell them, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to go to both. And so it was a fun Thursday for me. Outside of that, Not too much to report on, so let's get into the latest news. All right, you knew I was going to probably be talking about the Charleston County School District Board and all that debacle that happened last week. Not a ton of updates, but a few things to touch on. Number one, the backlash has been pretty much across the board against those 5 Moms for Liberty back candidates. Well, not candidates, board members. They were candidates, but they got elected. From local leaders, I think it was 91. I forget the exact number, but I think it was 91 principals in CCSD wrote like a joint letter also expressing their dismay and disappointment. Teachers groups. I mean, it's coming from everywhere. Their lack of transparency, what one newspaper columnist here in town said looks like a conspiracy, because they're not providing any details. They could very easily explain some of those moves away from last week by just talking about them, but they refuse to. Well, they refuse to talk to the public, their fellow board members, the media, but it's not stopping some of them from talking online. Yes, there are some Moms for Liberty like Facebook groups. Of course, they're closed to the public because they don't want, people screenshotting things. Oh, but lo and behold, several members of our community, of course, have gotten into these groups and frequently will share screenshots of what is being said. Now, it wasn't one of the board members, but it was the director or whatever her official title is for the Charleston chapter Moms for Liberties, Tara Wood. There was a screenshot being shared where she said, no, this not hiring Michelle Foreman, which you again go back to last week's episode for kind of the full explainer of all this stuff, was not racist. She didn't follow proper hiring protocol. Something along those lines is the reason why they would not hire Michelle Foreman. They made that decision at the same meeting where they also did away with the Health Advisory Committee or Council, and also decided to suspend Superintendent Dr. Eric Gallion. So even if that's true, and if it is, details should be made public so people understand it better. So say that is true. That's what happened. And we're going to need a little bit more details on that, of course. But let's say it happened, number one. And number two, it actually makes sense that they did not hire her because of that. All they needed to do was say that and present that evidence or explain what exactly she did that was inappropriate. And that would have put all this talk of, accusations of racism or, at worst, or at best case scenario, just trying to eliminate people that they feel aren't going to go for their political agenda. Of course, there shouldn't be any political agenda when it comes to the schools. So it's bad either way, whatever the reasoning is. But we don't know if you don't tell us what's going on. So you can't be mad when people are making assumptions or having to fill in the blanks that you refuse to provide. And they can provide them. They don't have to be silent about this. They are purposefully doing that. But even worse than all that, and more importantly, if they're not talking to anyone about this, why are they talking to Tara Wood about it? She's not on the school board. She is in charge of the local chapter of Moms for Liberty. So either one, she's pulling the strings, her and her chapter, and by extension, the national movement of this group are pulling the strings and telling these guys what to do, guys and girls, sorry. Being from the North, I always say you guys, just anyway. Telling these folks on the board that this is what you need to do, which is very concerning, of course. But number two, that means she is... If she wasn't the one pulling the strings, that means they were telling her the stuff they won't tell anybody else. And that's not transparent, and that is wildly inappropriate. They can do and say whatever they want, of course. But if you're looking for transparency from a board, if you're looking for just explanations, this is not how you're supposed to do it. You don't go to your some political organization and tell them what's going on, but not the actual people you serve in the community. Now, it could also, another possibility, of course, is that they went to her and told her, hey, maybe we can get this person on this, whatever this hiring process is. And of course, they got the blessing of the Moms for Liberty group. So there is that whole side to it. Nope, not going to tell the community, the parents, the people that we're supposed to be serving. We're supposed to be doing things for the kids. No. We're not going to talk to them about it. We're going to talk to this political organization who is, basically in charge of what we do. They'll know what's going on, but none of you. And of course, there's a possibility that Wood is just completely making this up and there was no problem either. She's on a Facebook group. She can say whatever she wants. No one's going to, there's going to be no consequences if she just made that whole thing up. So it just continues to look very, very bad. Meanwhile, the other members of the Charleston County School District Board plan to hold a press conference today, Monday, to discuss what they say are recent actions taken by the CCSD Board of Trustees, including putting new Superintendent Dr. Eric Gallion on administrative leave. They said in their statement that they agree with the learning communities that these actions are unconscionable, their words, and I agree, and must be addressed. The press conference is scheduled for noon today outside the CCSD administration office building, and I'll provide updates on if there's any, anything substantial that comes out of that in the next podcast. Those board members are Darlene Dunmeyer Roberson, Dr. Carol Temple, Courtney Waters, and Duran Lee Calhoun II. They are the board members who are not Moms for Liberty backed and will be hosting this event. They talked about their colleagues, Carlotte Bailey, Edward Kelly, Keith Grabowski, Leah Watley, and Pamela McKinney, who, of course, last week caused these intense public backlash that I was mentioning before, the confusion and outrage in the community when they voted to place the superintendent on paid administrative leave pending an investigation, and the fact that they provided no reason for either of these. Additionally, the group went on to say that the Moms for Liberty backed candidates refused to confirm Michelle Simmons as the permanent chief academic officer. I mentioned that before, as she was the person responsible for leading the district's increase in the spring 2023 test scores. That's right. Test scores went up under her watch. They were celebrating that a couple weeks ago, and then they decided, nope, not going to hire her, which is what we were just talking about. And of course, I also mentioned that they dismantled the Health Advisory Committee by dismissing members whose term limits had not yet expired. So they touched on the things that we've talked about in the last podcast. I'm glad they're holding a press conference to discuss this, or, hopefully we'll get some more information out of this. In addition to that, a community meeting has also been scheduled for 7:30 p.m. on Monday at the Charity Baptist Church, which you can find at 1544 East Montague Avenue in North Charleston. Organizers for that event said the topic up for discussion will be stopping racism and discrimination against Black students and staff in the school district. So, accusations of racism are easy to throw out. At the same time, I think a lot of times it is accurate. To be fair, I can absolutely see how it looks like some of these moves are racist. To be fair, approaching this from a journalism eye, there is nothing concrete in their words or anything that has come out that is the case. It's still not good. It's still political, but it may just be dumb political reasons, these made up issues that we've talked about with CRT and LGBTQ. And then, the fact that they hate during the pandemic, the schools were closed or masks were required and vaccines were something that were being promoted and yada, 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 yada. It certainly seems it's without a doubt that's part of it. Could racism also be part of it? I mean, maybe. So I'm just saying that because there's a lot of those accusations and they could very well be true. And they certainly can look like it at times. But just for clarity, I have not seen anyway anything concrete or for sure. Again, doesn't mean it isn't. That's just what it is. So I just wanted to put that out there. Regardless of the reasoning, it doesn't look good. So if you're hearing this and you're frustrated like many people in our community and wondering what there is you can do, well, maybe we'll learn more at the press conference because, as I mentioned, there is really no motivation for these 5 members to make any changes to what they've been doing because they're in control. But, you can continue to voice your displeasure, whether it's by emailing them, tweeting at them, showing up at meetings and talking during the public comment section. Of course, if you're doing things like that, keep it as not professional, but let's not do anything, over the line. No threats of violence, nothing like that. You can be stern, you can call them out with things, but let's not distract by crossing the line and stooping to a level that others have in the past. So if you're going to voice your displeasure, just keep that in mind. Let's not make the story change because a few people are doing dumb things like death threats or threatening violence or whatever else. We have too much of that in this country. So just, you could be stern, you could be mad, you can even be rude, but let's keep that in mind. In addition to that, there's a petition that is going around. The link is in the show notes. Sometimes these online petitions, sometimes they do lead to change. Sometimes they don't, but it can't hurt to at least try, especially since it does not appear there is much else recourse we have at this point. So go ahead and sign that and share it. The link is in the show notes. And again, I'll provide you with any updates after Monday's meetings and press conferences that we were just discussing. Changing gears here. During COVID, we learned that a lot of people in this country and a lot of people in this state just aren't fans of science. And not that everything went perfect, because we know it did not. But there's been a change in this country where people are against doctors and scientists and experts in different fields if they are sharing data that they just don't like for political reasons. So no surprise when it comes to something medical or scientific related, South Carolina ranks poorly in that category. The latest example is sexually transmitted diseases. That's right. Rates for STDs have been rising nationally, and in South Carolina, that is no different. Recent data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which was compiled and released by U.S. News, has South Carolina ranked number 4 nationally for the highest STD rate cases per 100,000 people. The total STD rate in South Carolina sits at 1,052 people per 100,000. Additionally, the chlamydia rate is 702.7 per 100,000, while the gonorrhea rate is 309.2 per 100,000, and the syphilis rate is 40.1 per 100,000. So, for those who don't really get that whole thing, that means per every 100,000 people in our community, the first number is the average you can expect of people that have that particular STD. So in general, the STD rate out of 100,000 people in the state, 1,052 of those 100,000 have an STD of some kind. And as I stated, that ranks us 4th. Who's ahead of South Carolina, if you're wondering? Mississippi is number 1, Louisiana number 2, Alaska number 3. The top 10 list reads exactly how you would imagine it would. A lot of states where their voting record and beliefs tend to shy away from science and data and facts. So no surprises there. Well done, as always, South Carolina. There's many reasons for this, of course. I'm being a bit of a jerk about this whole science and everything else. But there's obviously more to that. It's also not appropriate sex education in schools. South Carolina, you don't have to teach medically accurate information. And groups like Moms for Liberty are pushing more and more for even less sex education in schools, which just means things like this are going to rise. A lack of education, a lack of explaining to people, and obviously age appropriate. So like high school, for instance, not explaining to them what the STD rates are, what kind of STDs are out there, how easy it is to get one. And the fact that, a lot of people want abstinence only training, which is historically shown that it does not work. That schools that tend to do that, states, cities, whatever, they tend to have higher rates of STDs because these kids are not taught appropriately how contraceptives work or any type of safe sex. And so no surprise that we have such a high rate. It all comes back to education and lack of trust in those who know better. and a lot of times, like I said, it comes down to political reasons. So no surprise. Be safe out there. Last story is an update on that horrific Folly Beach crash that happened earlier this year. A settlement is awaiting a judge's approval in the case of the Folly Beach low-speed vehicle crash, which killed bride Samantha Miller and injured 3 others on her wedding night back in April. Samantha Miller, who had just married her husband, was only 34 years old, and she was killed after the low-speed vehicle that she, her husband Eric Hutchinson, and 2 family members were driving was rear-ended by alleged drunk driver Jamie Lee Komorowski. The pending death settlement is between Miller's estate and her husband, Eric Hutchinson, and the defendants that include Crab Shack Incorporated, which, the Crab Shack restaurants, the Folly Deli, the Drop-In Bar and Deli, and Progressive Northern Insurance Company. The local establishments allegedly served Komorowski, who is described in the lawsuit as, quote, bar hopping the day of the crash. According to court documents, these businesses have agreed to settle under the South Carolina Wrongful Death Act and Survival Act. The petition for approval of death settlement now has to be approved by a judge before it can be finalized. So a couple points I wanted to get across here. Good that there's a settlement. Good that money is going to be going to Eric Hutchinson, his family, the victim's family, and whoever is going to be seeing that money. That's good, of course. And I also think it's good that establishments can be held accountable in these types of incidents if it is shown that they overserved someone, ignored obvious signs that they were way too inebriated to be continued to be served, or they knew this person was driving, things like that. I do think the law needs to be tweaked a little bit, especially here in South Carolina. We talked about this on previous episodes, where if she's bar hopping and the first place she went to served her a beer or 2, why are they just as liable or liable at all as the last bar or the last couple bars where she was? And I'm saying this as a hypothetical because I haven't seen any of the actual evidence yet, but ostensibly showing signs of being inebriated, maybe not needing any more alcohol. That part doesn't make sense to me. If a person goes to a bar, and in this case, she started on Daniel Island and then goes to Folly Beach and then bar hops at 3 or 4 different bars in the Folly Beach area, why is that first bar liable at all? Unless she showed up there drunk or ordered a plethora of drinks there. But if you go to a bar and order a drink or 2 and then leave, and then go crazy the rest of your night, keep going, get in a car accident, kill someone. Why is that first bar liable? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, maybe there's evidence that'll come out, maybe not since there's a settlement, but maybe in the course of the trial itself, some evidence will come out that makes sense as it pertains to that. But assuming it doesn't, how is that fair? And that's one thing I don't like. And of course, we've also heard the stories of this liability insurance is so astronomical that a lot of businesses are either deciding to close, are worried that they're going to have to close, or in the case of the Sparrow in Park Circle, decided to close a little bit earlier because they didn't want to renew this insurance even for a small amount of time because the prices were so high. So it is an issue that needs to be looked at. Again, I think there are situations where businesses should be held liable. This does not, we don't know the details yet. But if in the case of someone who's bar hopping, or like is drinking at a bar at 8 p.m., leaves without any obvious signs of inebriation or anything like that, and then gets in a car accident at 4 a.m. because they went to 7 other bars, why is that first bar part of this at all? So again, something that needs to be looked at. This is not at all trying to take away from the family and what they deserve from this situation. It's just something that I think we need to look at a little bit in addition, to, yes, it is good that they are getting money. Definitely don't want to give the impression otherwise, but I think there are some situations where places are being held accountable for something that they shouldn't be held accountable for because they didn't necessarily do anything wrong. But we'll see where that goes as it relates to this whole insurance that bars and restaurants have to carry and the increasing rates and what that is doing to some local businesses here. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you have a great rest of your week. If you have a moment, please rate and review this podcast, subscribe to it, leave a review, whatever you can do. It helps out, and I greatly appreciate it. If you want to go that extra step, go to holycitycenter.com/shop, where you can pick up some merchandise, or go to patreon.com/holycitycenter, where you can sign up for one of those support tiers. Big thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this episode, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode. I'll talk to you all on Wednesday. Already looking forward to it. Until then, though, good night. Good luck.